Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to episode 14 of the Unstoppable Entertainment Show, the most comprehensive entertainment show on the internet. I am, of course, Nate Schaffner, otherwise known as the Unstoppable Nate. Um, it's been kind of a slow news week here, and movie and TV wise. It's been kind of slow. So I'm going to try something a bit different this week, and we'll see how it goes. I don't really know. Uh, I hope you guys like it. But before I get into that, I just want to remind everybody that if you like this show, you can hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and spread the word. Tell your friends. Also, if you have a comment or a question, or if you'd like me to talk about certain movies or franchises, uh, you can email me anytime at the address listed in the description of this video. So, with that out of the way, one of the things that I said when I started this show was that you might learn something new about me. And seeing as how it's been kind of a slow news week, I thought I would try that and give you guys a brief glimpse into my life and my journey to this point. And hopefully you guys like it. Um, I'm honestly not sure how long I'm gonna go, and maybe, and I'm not sure how to begin. But I will say that um, I so right now, I for the past several years, my wife and I have lived in Albuquerque, and we are currently living there now. But Cincinnati, Ohio, is my home. I am that's where I lived most of my life, and Cincinnati is is home to me. But I was born in California. I was born in Riverside, California, on an Air Force base. Actually, my dad was a JAG in the Air Force. He was a Judge Advocate General, and from what I understand, he was quite good at his job. It's weird. I've never asked either of my parents, like, what is it that you exactly do. Uh, I knew generally what they did, but I never, it's not like we had take your child to work day all the time, and it's not like I paid attention. It's I I don't know why that is. Um, but I was born on March Air Force Base in Riverside, although it's not called March Air Force Base anymore. I believe it's called the March Air Reserve Base. And um, so my dad was a JAG in the Air Force, and either shortly before or shortly after I was born, he had an assignment here in Albuquerque, and he hated it. Um, by the way, if I'm getting I don't know if I'm um, getting this information correct. Like, the reason I say that is because we all have our first childhood memory, right? Everybody knows what that is. But I don't know much about my family and my life prior to that, obviously. So it's fuzzy. I only know what I was told, and I hope I'm getting my information correct. And if I'm not, I'm sure that there are a couple of family members who will correct me. Um, so so anyway, so uh, my dad had an assignment here in Albuquerque at Kirtland Air Force Base, and he hated it. I'm not sure if he hated his assignment or hated Albuquerque. Maybe it was a little bit of both. So he he retired. He retired. And again, that was either shortly before or shortly after I was born. And so he retired, and my mom got a job at the Sixth Circuit Courts in downtown Cincinnati, Ohio. So, and so it's my understanding that he retired, she got the job, and my dad, my mom, myself, and my grandparents, my mom's parents packed up the car and they helped us move out to Cincinnati, Ohio. And my mom worked for she was a librarian at the Sixth Circuit Courts in Cincinnati, and I think she worked there for like 35 years, maybe a little bit more. And my dad was a stay-at-home dad, and my mom worked. Um, and uh, it's funny. I think my father liked the idea of having kids, but once it actually happened, he didn't really know what to do. Um, you know, so life. I remember my childhood being very. I mean, it wasn't entirely unpleasant, but it wasn't ideal either. Um, it wasn't. I lived in my imagination a little bit when I was a kid. We lived in Montgomery, Ohio, which is about a half hour outside of Cincinnati, and we had a we had a bridge overlooking a creek, and I remember as a kid having I would have a little hideout under the bridge, like a little troll. uh, but no, I had a hideout under my bridge, and whenever didn't whenever I felt comfortable, I guess whenever I or uncomfortable, or whenever I got scared or whatever, that was where I went, and I took trips down the creek, and you know I walked down the stuff like that, and I lived in my imagination, and um, I remember, yeah, my my dad my dad and my mom had two completely different ways of raising us. Um, my dad was a very kind of strict, very routine kind of person, and I think the concepts, the idea of enjoying life, the idea of pleasure, the ideas, these concepts of having fun. I think those were foreign to him. I think he didn't really understand, especially when I was a kid. He didn't really understand why I was interested in the things that I was interested in. My mom, on the other hand, embraced she embraced it. Just love what you love. Enjoy if you enjoy certain things. That's great. Um, I was bullied quite a bit when I was a kid, for uh, my interests, the way I dressed. I was when I was a kid, I was a big Star Trek fan. I loved Star Trek, and I still love Star Trek. Well, not the newer Star Trek. Um, but I grew up watching, The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and you know, I was bullied for enjoying stuff like that. I was, you know, I remember one incident where I actually got stuffed into a locker at school, and that was difficult to deal with. And it's funny. I think that still affects me to this day. Like I'm 40 years old, and it's still like I still only feel comfortable talking about the things that interest me around other people who are interested in the same things that I am. Like I still feel that way, and I don't feel comfortable talking about it to people who aren't, because I'm still afraid that I'm being judged. Not necessarily. I'm not afraid. Like I'm still afraid of being judged. I'm obviously not afraid of being bullied anymore, but I'm afraid of being judged. And it's funny because now the things that I got bullied for enjoying as a kid are now mainstream. All this everything within the geek culture um, is now everywhere. You can find it, like all the comic book stuff, all the Star Trek, all these science fiction, fantasy, and horror stuff. Is now everywhere, and nerds are in now. Nerds are cool now, but when I was a kid, not so much. Um, so I was bullied quite a bit at school, and um, like I said, things weren't entirely unpleasant at home, but they weren't ideal either. I don't. When you think of what an ideal marriage should be, I don't think my parents fall into that category. I mean, I could be wrong, but they didn't fight every day, but uh, it wasn't like I don't know what I'm having trouble describing it, but it wasn't entirely unpleasant, but it wasn't ideal either. I guess that's the best way to put it. And I remember watching, like it was very important for me to watch Star Trek as a kid, because that show gave me hope that everything was going to be okay, and that you know um, yeah, it just that show gave me hope. And I remember I actually remember watching one episode, and my dad called it Star Trash, and I remember just back talking him to his face, like literally to his face, like telling him to shut up, and which he didn't really like that too much. But anyway, um, and uh, my mom would take me to the movies every year for my birthday when I was a kid, which I always looked forward to. Um, so, like I said, my mom and my dad were two very different kinds of people, and so when I was a kid, my mom would take me to the movies every year, and the first movie that I remember seeing in the theater was uh, Disney's Peter Pan. I think it was like a 35th. Back in the 80s and 90s, they did Disney would re-release occasionally all of their classic films, and I think it was like a 35th anniversary re-release of Peter Pan, and my mom took me to see that, and the image of Peter and the Darling kids, flying around the bedroom, you can fly, that image still sticks with me. It's etched deeply into my brain, and the character, and I think because of that, the character and of Peter Pan has always been very important to me. I like the idea that this idea that you should never fully grow up. Like you always remember to have fun and enjoy life, and you know I've always maintained that I've always maintained a childlike sense of wonder about things. And I think that's important. And I think that was my big takeaway from. I think that's why the character and story of Peter Pan has always been important to me. Is like I don't. There's a line from a movie, from the movie Tropic Thunder, um, where Robert Downey Jr.'s character says, "You should never go full R word." I'm not going to say it because it's not politically correct anymore. But he says you should never go full R word. I will never be able to go full adult. Like I don't know how to do that. My wife jokes all the time that I'm an aging man child, and she's absolutely right. I've always, like I said, I've always maintained a childlike sense of wonder about things, and I think that's important. Um, so my mom would take me to the movies every year for my birthday, and she took me to see Peter Pan. She took me to see Aladdin. I remember I remember going to see Aladdin. And I remember at the end of the Genie's song, Friend Like Me. And there's that moment at the end of the song where um, this applause sign on the screen flashes. Applause, applause, applause. And I remember clapping. And I remember my mom going, "Stop it, stop, shh," So she took me to see Aladdin and Peter Pan, but the movie that really stuck with me, and I would watch movies. Well, that's a little later, but so my mom took me to see Jurassic Park, and that's the movie that really. That was one of those movies that changed my life completely. I mean, I was a dinosaur kid. I was essentially Tim from that movie. And that movie didn't scare me. That I was 9 years old in that movie theater, and I was dazzled by that movie. I was so enthralled with it. You know, um, and I there are certain sometimes you see a movie as a kid, and then you see it and then and then as you get older, you watch it and you critique it, and you judge it for its you start to pick it apart, right? I will never be able to watch Jurassic Park as an adult. Like every time I watch that movie, I'm 9 years old again. You know, and that was the first time, also I think, where the music of the movie really, excuse me, really stuck with me. Like I remember humming the theme to Jurassic Park quite frequently, um, and um, yeah, that was kind of the first movie in the cinema that really had an effect on me. And and I had seen, I had watched other movies. I think the movie that really, um, one of the other movies that made an impact on me was the original Blade Runner. I remember watching that movie at my grandparents' house, my mom's parents, and at their house in Maine, in South Portland, Maine, and I was 8 years old, and I remember watching that movie and just being, uh, again, just the world that was presented. Just I remember just being enveloped by it. You know, this world that Ridley Scott had created uh, for the movie, just being uh, enveloped, awash in it, and you know specifically the final sequence where uh, uh, Roy Deckard is hunting the three replicants, and Roy Batty is, and it's raining outside, and it's at night, and Roy Batty, you know, wonderfully played by Rutger Hauer. Just I remember just him howling into the wind at night, you know, and that you know the tears in the rain, you know, monologue. I that was I think that was the movie that started my love of science fiction, even at 8 years old. Um, so Jurassic Park was, but so Blade Runner and Jurassic Park were really the first two movies that had an effect on me, and that was I was 9, so that was 93, and um, and so many years later, uh, I think it was 99. Um, my parents got divorced. My mom uh, my mom uh, divorced my father, and I I kind of had mixed feelings about it. I was kind of like, why couldn't this just have been a normal day? Because what happened was, uh, my mom told me and my sister privately that she was going to divorce our dad, and I remember thinking, one, why couldn't this have just been a normal day, and two, well, it's about time. You know, I mean, again, it wasn't the perfect marriage by any means. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't ideal, and I, you know, at one point she just had enough, I think. And you know, I just want to say I don't think my father is a bad person. I've never thought that. I've never thought. Well, that's actually not true. Um, I divorce can be tough on everybody, um, and I do remember for a long time being angry at my father, for uh, because I do remember thinking, you know, he's the one that brought, you know, he brought the divorce on himself. But he was never. I just want to say he was never violent. He was never. I mean, physically violent. I should say. I mean, he. Everybody shouts. Everybody yells at one point in their life to their significant other. But he was never. I think he hit me once, and instantly regretted it. And he never did it again. He never did it again. He never hit my sister, as far as I know. He never hit my mother. Um, it was just the kind of person that he was. I think my mother just had enough, and it was. It took me a long time to um, be done being angry with him for the way he was with my mom. For it took me a long time to stop blaming him for the divorce. It took me a long time to not be angry with him anymore about how he was with me and my sister. Um, it took a long time, and I was starting high school at the time, and high school was kind of where everybody starts to find themselves and figure out who they are. So I there was that on top of the my parents' divorce, and it was and I'm not upset by that. That's just a fact. The fact that I was going through high school and the divorce, and it's just because like when your mother says to you, "I'm divorcing your father," and just because you have a mixed reaction of well, it's about time. Just because you have that kind of reaction doesn't mean that it doesn't affect you, and it did. I was angry at my father for a long time, and it took. I think in some ways, um, because high school is those years are very formative for kids. It took me a long time to get comfortable in my own skin and be comfortable expressing my passion and love for certain things. I think I've just now started, like over the past 5 years, I think I've finally started to um, be comfortable with the kind of person that I am. And again, these are things that I'm not bitter about. These are things that I'm just expressing as facts. And so I'm gonna back up a little bit. Um, when I was a kid, when I was in the fourth grade, um, my music teacher uh, came to at least my father, spoke to at least my father. I'm not sure whether she spoke to my mother. I'm not sure whether she spoke to my father and then my father spoke to my mother. But I do. My music teacher spoke with my father and basically told my. It was implied that I have a had. I'm not sure if I have it anymore. It was implied that I have um, a talent for singing, um, and I th- I think um, that was one of the reasons why my father raised me the way he did. Like I think his reaction was, "Oh, my son has a gift, and I'm going to raise him differently than my daughter now." And that I think that was part of the reason why my dad uh, favored me, um, which led to my mother possibly favoring my sister, And again, I just want to say that is not something that I am bitter about. I think that's just a fact. I think certain circumstances arose, and we were, and me and my sister were both raised in the ways that we were. Um, and I think it was also, and again, this is something that I barely remember. My dad took me to I forget what it was called specifically, but I basically took one of those childhood IQ tests, and uh, according to my father, now granted, my father said a lot of things. My father was, I think, like one of those conspiracy theorists. I think now looking back on it, he said some weird shit, in his time. According to my father, I tested with a very high IQ. Um, and so I think the proper term is gifted. I think is that the phrase? So I tested with a very high IQ, um, and uh, I'm not trying to boast or toot my own horn by saying that. I'm just relaying what I was told. Uh, and maybe he'd be maybe he'd be a little disappointed that I didn't go to MIT or anything like that. Who knows? But so the high IQ tests, the the singing voice thing. I think these were things that happened that led to my father raising me the way he did. So I think when I think from 9 until the age of 13 or 14, I stopped before high school. So when I was 9, I joined the Cincinnati Boy Choir. And it was, uh, it was fun. It was hard work, but it was fun. I think uh, I learned discipline from being in the Cincinnati Boy Choir. I learned how to behave in certain situations. I learned um, etiquette. I think I learned a lot, and it was a lot of fun. I am going to boast a little bit about this. I mean, when you're 10 or 11 years old and you're singing at Music Hall in downtown Cincinnati, Ohio, when you're singing Mahler's Eighth Symphony with the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra, that's a memory that ain't gonna leave me anytime soon. Um, and we traveled we traveled a bit. I when So there were three levels of the Cincinnati Boy Choir, and there was the highest level was the tour choir, which meant that you would tour the country. Um, and I don't remember a lot of traveling, but I do remember at one point, I think it was in St. Paul, Minnesota. I think it was in Minnesota. Um, it was, I forget what it was called, but it was essentially a gathering of choirs from all over the world. And we sung all kinds of music. I mean, it was all kinds of music and music from different cultures. I mean, we sung African music. I mean, I it was extraordinary. Um, so for 4 years, um, and I had sung with other choirs after that, but none of them I think are as or were as significant and memorable as singing with the Cincinnati Boy Choir. I remember uh, I had a uh, I remember in my early 20s I had a girlfriend of mine for a very brief time who was also a coworker, which by the way never do that. Um, and I remember telling her, that I sung with the Cincinnati Boy Choir, and we were in her car. We were driving somewhere, and she was like, "Holy crap!" And I was like, "What?" And she was like, "You can sing," and I'm like, "Yeah, you know, like not to brag or anything, but a little bit." And I sung a little bit in high school, and that was fun. Me and that was that was pretty fun. Um, and I did some theater in high school too. Uh, that was really fun. I think that was again, high school is one of those times where you're trying to figure out who you are and come into your own. And at that point in my life, like junior senior year of high school, I was really trying to figure out what it is that I wanted to do. Like I think junior year, senior year of high school, um, I figured out that I wanted to do something creative with my life. And I, um, I do, I, I can tell you that I loved being on stage. Um, and getting dressed in these extravagant costumes. And I remember uh, senior year, so this was 2003. Our senior play, we did uh, Les Miserables, and that was very special. That was I and there were I remember talking to a couple of people who said, "Holy crap, you're doing Les Mis in high school?" And I was like, "Yeah." And those rehearsals kicked our asses. We went home exhausted every day. Now, I was an extra. Whenever I did theater, I was an extra. I never I think academically I did well in the subjects that I cared about. Uh, I was a C student, if that, and so because of that, I wasn't able to play any major roles in Les Mis or The Wiz. We did The Wiz too. Twelfth Night we did that, but I was always an extra. And by the way, I I wasn't necessarily looking to play a major role. I was just looking to be in it. You know, like um, so I did choir and theater, and I do remember, and this is I would like to think that we all have that moment in our lives where we figure out what it is we want to do with our life. I'd like to think that we all have that epiphany moment where everything clicks in your head and you're just like, yep, that's what I want to do. And I remember, and so my dad took me to see The Phantom Menace, the first of the Star Wars prequels. And he had seen the original Star Wars in the theater. Now he had seen the original Star Wars when it was just called Star Wars. Like there was no Star Wars Episode 4 New Hope. He had seen it when it was just called Star Wars. But he had never seen any of the other films. I think at one point, in fact, I know at one point. So at one point, my sister. Long story short, my sister injured herself and she had to stay at the hospital overnight. And my mom stayed with her, and I stuck my dad into the house and we watched The Empire Strikes Back. Sorry, Mom. Hi, love you. Um, so, uh, so there's that. So my dad took me to see The Phantom Menace. Now look, say whatever you want about The Phantom Menace as a whole. That movie is not very good. But the moment where at the climax of the movie, after Obi-Wan's master Qui-Gon is dead, after Darth Maul has killed Qui-Gon Jinn, and Obi-Wan is fighting Darth Maul one-on-one. That was the moment for me where I was like, yeah, I want to make movies. I want to be I want to be a filmmaker. I want to do that. And in high school, movies were becoming more and more important to me. Movies have always been my passion, but high school was where I really kind of dedicated myself to watching a lot of movies. And I would also watch behind the scenes stuff, like I would buy the DVDs and buy the Blu-rays, and I would watch the making of documentaries and featurettes and all the interviews, and I would watch that stuff all the time because I was interested not in just watching the movies, but I was interested in how the movies were made. That was really important to me. I felt that was important because I wanted to be a filmmaker. And I think when I told my mom that I wanted to be a filmmaker, she found it odd because I had never picked up a camera in my life. She may have been like, okay, make sure you have a backup plan because there's no job security in the arts. But that was the big epiphany moment for me. The Obi-Wan and Darth Maul duel, and I was just like, okay, this is what I'm gonna do. But I struggled with it for a long time. I knew it was what I wanted to do. There are movies that I've seen that really had I remember Blade 2 was the first R-rated movie that I saw in the theater by myself. And I remember thinking, God, it's so cool to see an R-rated. I mean, I had watched R-rated movies before, at friends' houses. I had seen plenty of movies that I was probably too young to see because when we were still a family of four, we didn't have cable, we didn't have a VCR. So what we watched was very limited. And then, you know, sometimes when you're a kid and your parents get divorced, the person that you end up living with gives you everything you've ever wanted. So I got my own room and I got my own phone and I got, you know, a VCR and we got cable and we got all these things and I watched a lot of movies. Um, but before then, you know, I had to sneak off to my friend's house in the middle of the night and watch, you know, Friday the 13th and Terminator 2 and Alien, you know, all this stuff. But yeah, Blade 2 was the first R-rated movie that I saw in the theater. And I remember thinking, one, it's pretty cool that I get to see an R-rated movie in the theater by myself without my parents. And two, I do remember every so often thinking while sitting in that theater, I'm like, is somebody going to come in here and kick me out because I'm clearly the youngest one in here? I mean, they had carded me, but you know, I was still a little bit paranoid. But I struggled. I think I struggled with going to film school for a long time because I was afraid of failure. I didn't want to pursue it and it ending up not coming to fruition. So I uh, tried. I went to Northern Kentucky University for a year, and that didn't really and I dropped out of that. And I did some. I tried doing theater, and that didn't work. And then I went to what was it? Cincinnati Community Technical College or something. It was a community college, and that didn't work either. And in fact, I remember uh, I my very good friend Mike Shreve, who was my best man at my wedding. We both went to that school, to the Cincinnati Community College, and neither of us liked it. So every morning when our parents left for work, he would come over to the house and we would play Grand Theft Auto all day and until it was time for our parents to come home, and then he would leave. Hi, Mom. Love you. um, so it took me a long time to really kind of get off my ass and pursue my dream. Um, and I had another moment in my life where I was just like, you know what? I'm tired of, trying and failing is better than not trying at all. And I wanted to learn how to make movies. And and I remember my mom and and I went to dinner, and I told her, I said, I'm going to do this. Will you help me? And and I did it, and I went to film school, and I learned how to make movies that are within my capabilities. I say all the time, there are sometimes there are movies that I like to go see, and sometimes there are movies that I think I could make, and sometimes I see a little bit of both. Um, I these big epic fantasy movies like the Marvel movies and I could never do something like that, but I think I could make something akin to Goodwill Hunting. That is within my capabilities, I think. So I went to film school, and that was 4 years of my life that I look back on very fondly. I made several short films and a couple documentaries, none that you would have seen, but I am quite proud of them. In fact, I took one of my documentaries to an in-state. I was we were My wife and I were living in Pennsylvania at the time, and the documentary that I made, one of the documentaries that I made, we went to an in-state film festival, and that was a lot of fun. That was pretty cool. Um, and and after I finished film school, um, I met uh, I met people in film school who I'm still friends with to this day, and they're very dear friends of mine. And uh, I have a very good friend of mine, Hannah Sutter, and her wife Sarah, and um, they actually moved out to Albuquerque before me and my wife did. So um, they moved out here because I met Hannah and Sarah when I was in film school, and when Hannah finished film school, she and Sarah moved out here to Albuquerque because the film industry was huge and is still huge out here. And at one point, me and Hannah were talking on the phone, and or we were texting. We were on the phone, and she said, you know, the film industry is really booming out here. If you ever like to come out, and I said, okay, let me talk it over with Katie, with my wife, and we did. And I called Hannah back, and I said, see you in 6 months. And um, I've worked on out here in Albuquerque. I've worked on 4 productions, um, a couple of which I'm very proud of. One I'm not so proud of, but you know, a couple I'm not so proud of. But you'll have that, you know. Um, and I remember telling my mom and my sister when we moved, when my wife and I, when my wife Katie moved out here, I remember telling them, I said, you know, I have to try. I have to give it a shot, because if I don't, then I don't want to be on my deathbed 40 years from now wishing I had done this. You know, I don't want to do that. I'd rather give it a shot and fail than not give it a shot at all. And I remember saying, I have to try. And I have. And I've I've had I've had a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun going to film school and pursuing, and that part of my life. I Film school, I look back on that very fondly, and working on these 4 productions that I've worked on was even though the end result may or may not have been pleasant, the experience was very pleasant. The first production that I work on, I remember saying, I remember like constantly having to like take it all in, and like, you know, there's that, you know, you have to pinch yourself, you know. And Hannah told me, you know, you deserve it, and so that meant a lot. And so my passion for movies from the time I was a little kid has always been present, and it will never go away. Um, I uh, I've always loved, not I've said this before, but I've always loved watching movies and then watching, like, talking talking about movies, the performances, uh, the effects, the shots. I love just dissecting and analyzing films as well as watching them. I am someone who would watch the behind the scenes making of featurettes of movies. Sometimes I would watch them more often than the actual movie because that stuff interests me, and it still interests me. Um, so my passion for movies has I've always had a passion for movies since I was a little kid, um, and I will say I don't go to the movies very much anymore. And that has nothing to do with, like, my love and passion for film is still there. It's just I'm becoming very picky about the movies that I see in the theater because look, I'm 40 years old, guys. Like, I say that because I'm tired. There are things that I'm realizing now as I'm older. Like, I don't have time. I don't want to waste time on certain things, you know. And there are one of those things is, like, I'm tired of watching a trailer for a movie that I'm interested in and then going to see the movie and being like, what the hell was that? Like, this movie promised one thing and then out came this bag of crap. So I've in the past within the past year, I've become very picky about the kinds of movies that I see uh, in the theater. And I still love the movie theater going experience. I love it. That going to the movies is like church for me. You know, that's um, and I should say, by the way, I'll watch anything. That I don't have. I mean, there are certain genres that I gravitate more towards, but I'll watch anything. I think I think the main reason why I love science fiction, fantasy, and horror is because those genres provide an escape, at least for me. Um, the real world can be a pretty shitty place sometimes, and going to the movies, um, for me, provides an escape from that, and those genres provide an escape for that. Um, Again, there are certain genres that I gravitate more towards, but I'll watch anything. I'll watch. I love all the old, like, Gene Kelly and uh, um, Fred Astaire. I love all those old musicals. Rom coms can be great date night movies with me and my wife. I'll watch anything. I don't discriminate. Uh, but so um, lately, uh, the film industry, I think, is slow right now. Um, if you if you do the research and you talk to people, I mean, I have friends in the industry, and they're like, "Yeah, it's a little slow right now," and uh, I think there are certain things happening that the movie theater industry is struggling as well. And I, I'll say this too: while I've had a good time working on the productions that I've worked on, I don't know where I thought my film career would be after 5 years, maybe 6 years, but it's not. It hasn't panned out the way I thought it would. And I'm not angry. I'm not disappointed. I I've worked hard. Again, I'm just saying this matter of factly. These are things. It's just happened. Um, but if I get a call for another film job, I'm absolutely going to take it. I sometimes the film industry is a cruel business, and um, all I can say is that I've had a blast going to film school and working on the few productions that I've worked on. I really have have had the time of my life with that specific part of my life. And I will always look back on it very fondly. It's just that for whatever reason, um, things aren't working out, so I've had to adjust uh, certain priorities, I guess you could say. Um, but again, my passion is always there. My passion for film is always there. And that has kind of led me here to this point. Um, I have always had something to say about the film industry, about films. I have a lot of thoughts and opinions about film and the film industry. And I was um, I got to a point where I was like, I want to do I want to find a way to express those thoughts and opinions uh, instead of constantly um, uh, expressing those thoughts and opinions to my wife and boring her to death with that. Now she'd be the first to tell you, I'm gonna listen to whatever you have to say. She loves to hear me talk about things that I'm passionate about. I'm like, yeah, well, that's great, but I kind of want to. I kind of want to get my voice out there more, and talk more. And so that has led me here to doing this show and doing this and talking uh, entertainment news and things that are happening in the industry. Um, and I have to say I'm having a blast doing this show. It can be difficult from time to time. Like I said last week, there are I I am familiar with a couple of people who do this every day, and I don't know how they do it. you know, I don't know how they come up with stuff to say, and this is they talk film industry stuff every day, and I'm like, I don't know how you do it. But maybe that's just me. You um, and I'm having a blast doing this show. I mean, it can be hard work from time to time, but I love it, and I wouldn't do it if I didn't love it. So that has led me here, and again, um, this is kind of been a brief glimpse uh, into um, the kind of person that I am, the kind of life that I've had. Um, I I I sincerely hope that I haven't bored you to death with any of this. Um, and you know, again, I just want to say my passion for film has will always be present. Um, and I'm having fun doing this show, and I hope uh, you've had fun listening to me ramble for an hour. So I will be back next week, um, hopefully uh, with more stuff to talk about. Hopefully with more news to talk about. Um, if if not, I will find a topic to talk about. I promise you that, and you will definitely I will definitely have something to talk about next week, regardless of the amount of movie news. So I hope you've enjoyed the show this week. I hope I haven't bored you too much, and I will talk to you all next week. And until then, I'll see you at the movies.